Well, hello and welcome back to my next live stream. I am very excited today to have a current client with me, Patricia Kapnizos, and we're working on refining her strengths. She's just come back from the UK. But Patricia, why don't you tell us in your own words about yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me this morning.
Pleasure.
So a bit about myself. I have just returned back to Melbourne. I was really fortunate to have spent the last few years working and living in the UK and Europe. I started off as a business consultant, and that later led into leading partnerships within the EMEA region. I consulted to retailers and helped to drive customer-centric retailing. So what this meant is I helped them understand and identify who their most loyal and most valuable customers were. I helped upskill the internal retailing teams to drive decisions based on data. I enabled them to access the data, interpret it, use the customer data platforms, and really put the customers at the core of the decisions they were making that impacted their customers.
Yeah.
In terms of partnership specialist, what that meant and leading partnerships is I owned the relationship between the business and our clients. So what I tried to do here was build valuable relationships and build win-win outcomes so that the relationship was commercially viable for all parties involved. I needed to execute and deliver on my commitments and build trust. And just as importantly, I needed to communicate in a way that kept everybody aligned, that there was no room for misinterpretation, and that enabled me to continue to grow the relationships with my clients.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that sounds so valuable. I mean, just thinking about one of your last points about the misinterpretation, so easy for that to happen for all kinds of reasons, even just distraction, lack of focus. But then, of course, we come to ideas around perhaps culture. And I know you've worked in a lot of different cultures and dealt with different, cultures and from collective to individual. So what would you like to tell us in terms of how we need to adapt for that?
So yeah, I'm really lucky to have worked in different countries around the world, and this is something that is interests me because I find it quite fascinating. So for example, like and I'm using huge generalizations here. I know everybody's unique and everybody's got their own, reason for being. But, I've worked with some German clients and I find them to be quite direct and matter of fact. And, I'll ask them, I'll explain a complex topic to them and I'll ask if they understand. And they'll say, well, no, I don't understand because you weren't clear on A, B, and C. Or they'll say, yes, I do understand. You went through it perfectly well.
Yes.
So I know, they're very direct and I know exactly where I stand and I'm fine with that. But then, total opposite. I've done some work in Southeast Asia as well. And, I'll explain the same complex topic. And if I was to ask for their understanding in the same manner, I'd get a very different response. So if I was to ask, do you understand? 9 times out of 10, I'd get back, yes, I do understand, regardless of whether they understand. Because culturally, it's polite to say yes, because you don't want to offend the other person. And I just find those contrasting views really interesting. And, in Southeast Asia, the way I would seek understanding is to ask an open-ended question or ask them to explain their understanding back to me. So I would say, based on what I've just taken you through, how would you now approach the challenge that we're discussing?
Yes. And then it unlocks what they know. Yes. Yeah.
And that's a way of diffusing to diffuse the cultural aspect of them wanting to be so polite and wanting to please the other person and not wanting to offend them. It takes that out of the equation.
Yes, and it has to, doesn't it? Because, and I think again, we are generalizing, and a lot of people will be aware of these nuances, but it's always worth considering. And I love your idea, which I think is incredibly important in general when we communicate, is around asking, don't assume. because it's so easy as a shortcut. We all have biases and mental models and these shortcuts, and we can make assumptions simply through lack of time or whatever's going on. So that ability to ask, and certainly I know when I talk about this sort of adaptable authenticity, that we need to be adaptable. And it sounds absurd, and a lot of people go, well, of course I'm adaptable, Sarah, but then actually we'll hit a point where they'll say to me in our work together, and they'll go, well, this is who I am, and this is how I need to communicate. And then we'd have to look at that, because it might not be serving what they're trying to achieve. And as you coming back to what you said initially, Patricia, it's, that win-win, which is obvious, but at the same time, so many things can get in the way. And our style can really have that impact. And I'm a big believer is that if I look at the very top level, it's about respect. And if it doesn't matter who we're speaking with, if we are non-judgmental and respectful, those are two of my key tenets for how we communicate with anybody. And I think that sort of being adaptable and being able to think about different stakeholders. Yeah. And any other thoughts about that? I know you mentioned we had a chat once where you talked about an example where you were put in a room with people and kind of lined up. How was that one working?
Yeah. So this leads into a second point is when you say adaptable. So to me, that means what I try to do is quickly identify the level of detail that the other person is comfortable with. And I try to adapt to that. So I know that some people like a lot of detail, like to know all of the steps to get from point A to point B, and they're comfortable with knowing everything. Yeah. Whereas some other people in that exact situation, I'd lose them in, when I'm discussing point number 2. Yeah. So what I try to do very quickly is understand the level of detail people are comfortable with, and I try to reflect that back. Because if I don't, my message won't land the way I'm intending it to.
Yes, exactly. And you will lose them, as you say. And it comes back to asking, doesn't it? Often, I mean, not endlessly asking, but this gauging it and then going, checking in and seeing how that's working.
Yeah. And I approach that from sort of a stakeholder perspective, but and the example that you were just alluding to is what I did a few years back was a team building exercise where we had an external organization come in and they asked us to fill out a questionnaire, and then they separated us into 4 groups, and we didn't know what was happening. And they gave us a paragraph, a situation, and in our 4 groups, they asked us to write and provide instructions to be given to a family member to get us to our flight the next morning at 7 a.m. to make sure that we were on time. And I remember the outcome of the 2 extreme groups. And there was one group that said, right, before you go to bed, you've got to set your alarm. Then your alarm will go off in the morning, wake up, wash your face, brush your teeth, make breakfast, have a shower. And it went on and on and on and on and got us to the airport. And then the other group, they basically said, set your alarm before you go to bed, call the taxi company, make sure they're going to arrive at your house by 5, and you'll get to the airport by 7. And then they lined us up based on our questions. So they ranked us from 1 to 30 or however many of us there were. And they had us look at each other and explained that the person in position 1 that loved all the detail, they needed to adapt their style when they were working with person in position 30 because that person hated detail. And so they just had us look at each other to realize that even in a group situation where we're all colleagues, you really need to adapt in order to be an effective communicator.
Yes, and that's a classic example, isn't it? And it's like, so I'm seeing a question from Lucy. Hi, Lucy. Nice to see you. What are practical ways you can gauge stakeholders' level of comfort when it comes to details? The usual assumption being that the more senior you are, the less you care about the details. That's not true. Yes. So, Patricia, would you like to answer that? Do you ask them directly about how much detail they want, or is there some other technique that you would use?
No, I'd be open and honest. I would. So the way I build my own comfort and my own confidence is to be prepared. So I'll go into that situation prepared to go into a lot of detail because I've done all the work prior, or I'll also be prepared to be able to adapt the message so it's more strategic or it's more aligned with objectives. And then I would ask the other person, how much detail would you like us to cover on point X?
Yes.
And let them drive it.
Yes. Yes. And I totally agree with you on that one. And I think, I hope, Lucy, that answers your question. Feel free to ask again if you would like to, if you want us to go into any other angle of this. But yes, I entirely agree with you. And there's an influencing, she's a Yale, in fact, she does behavioral marketing. So Zoe Chance, who influences, and she's a lot on YouTube. I think she still works in Yale. And she talks about the fact that the key magic influencing question is to say, what would it take to, and this is more about influence and persuading people, but you're actually asking them directly. And you're going, well, what would it take to influence you on this? Or what would it take?
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's a nice one, isn't it? And then she says, that's the magic question of influencing. And you don't necessarily know that people may not want to respond and they may keep their cards close and they're not going to answer you, but you've got a very good chance of getting more out if you do ask them directly. I guess perhaps that comes back to, is ask clarifying questions. Yes, I'm just looking at another comment from Cher there. And Lucy, great. I'm glad that answered the question for you. Because if people are indirect, and as you've, I guess, commented on about how you would deal with, say, Southeast Asia, asking them directly. So if you ask Southeast Asia people directly, what level of detail would you like us to cover? I'm assuming you would get a straight response from that. And that wouldn't be a challenge because it's their face is being preserved. This idea that they don't want to be impolite to you or show that their lack of knowledge.
Yeah.
That doesn't.
Well, that's an open-ended question. So
exactly.
You're absolutely spot on with that. But if I was to say, I'm going to go into a lot of detail, are you okay with that? I would get yes. Or, I'm not going to go into this with a lot of detail. I'll just do top line. Is that okay with everybody? Yes, it is. So the way you phrase that question was perfect.
Yes, that open-ended. Yes, I love that. That's great. Thank you. And I also think about, culturally, it's so interesting. And I'm going to come back to, and I guess being adaptable and thinking about culture, because in Australia, which is obviously where we're speaking from, we're both in Melbourne. And Melbourne is hugely multicultural. And even I was laughing beforehand with you about the fact that you've got, Greek heritage. I've got Scottish New Zealand heritage. Originally very Scottish and then went to New Zealand. And, I was taught to dampen things down and, keep everything calm.
And I'm the complete opposite. In my household, we're really animated and we yell over each other, but we're not angry. And, the loudest voice will be heard. And that's okay. That's what we do. That's how we've been brought up. That's our background and our culture. But I think, Sarah, the awareness we have of different cultures and each other and living in a place like Australia, I think adds another layer to being an effective communicator.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think, gosh, we never raised our voices growing up because that would have been disastrous and conflict and it was not okay. So yeah, isn't it amazing? And I think too, it's such a factor that when I'm sort of considering the whole global aspect about how we communicate, how we adapt, how we communicate. And so much of this comes down to, I think Australia is sort of somewhere in the middle. You've got direct, indirect, we use humor as well. And I think that particular Australian aspect of humor can make a big difference because we're probably, and I'm not sure anyone who's going to be watching the replay or is indeed watching today live, I think you'd probably agree that humor is a great diffuser and relationships, particularly in Australia, are incredibly important. So it's all about that connection and that how we relate. Whereas other cultures, clarity is very important. And again, that comes also down to stakeholder experience and years and all of that. But I think connection and clarity, all of these things come into play in those different variations.
Yeah. And that sort of brings me back, and you're absolutely spot on. In some of the client meetings and relationships, I'm just thinking back to over the years, I used to play that humorous, crazy Australian, and I used to do that on purpose to diffuse tough conversations.
Yes.
It was just to give everybody a chance to sort of take a step back and relax a little bit. And I'd say silly things at my own expense. And I'd do that in order to give everybody just a second to sort of come together. And, you know, if they had to laugh at me, that was fine. But you're right, because I do find myself using humor even when I don't realize that I'm doing it. So yeah, you're spot on with that one.
And how did that work for you in the UK? Were they come? I assume they liked it, and I mean they're very comfortable.
Yeah, well, I was just the crazy Australian.
Yeah. Okay. So that was and they it's your persona.
Yeah, but then I'd switch it off like when I needed to, when you know, it was an important decision time.
Yes.
But I think, you know, we're all people, and you know, we're trying to find a common ground. And yeah, sure, there'll be some tough conversations that you need to be serious, but you know, in general, I think that we're trying to find a common ground. We're trying to find a connection, and if humor allows us to find that middle place, why not?
Definitely. It's such a diffuser. I mean, humor is one of the fastest ways, and I deal with this when clients are nervous, that humor is an incredibly fast reframe for us. So if we can laugh at ourselves or think of something that's funny and just relaxes us, exactly as you were saying, relaxes everybody, it's a reset button. It's such a good reframe. And it can also help you if you're stressed about speaking in any way. It can kind of get you out of yourself, and fast reset button for you too.
Yeah.
And I think I'm just looking at a couple more comments. So Belinda's saying she agrees. So hi, Belinda. Nice to see you again. And so pleased that you're agreeing. And we also have a LinkedIn user where saying, and I'm not sure if we can bring that onto the screen, but in some Asian cultures, yes, this avoiding conflict, exactly. So when they say yes, it's tone and body language, but they might be agreeing. So what would you think to that around the tone and the body language? How would you view those cues, Patricia, to go, oh, okay, as well as asking open-ended? How would you?
It's a tricky one. I mean, sometimes it's quite obvious, you know, you can see if a person's sort of closed and sort of sitting within themselves. But to sort of an outsider going into that culture, for me, again, I come back to the open-ended questions, because I can misinterpret body language of another culture if I've not been brought up in it.
Yes.
I mean, you know, as I said, there are some cues that absolutely I can be across. But it comes back to asking them to give me an understanding of what they understand.
Yes. And I really like what you just said, because to me that comes back to my top level thought earlier, which is around that's actually showing respect. And again, it's not assuming. And so not only verbally asking directly, but actually not making an assumption about body language.
When I was traveling in Greece, like from a personal perspective, sometimes they actually nod their head when they're saying no.
Oh, yes.
And I know that because of the household I grew up in. But for somebody else going and visiting there, and if they're just looking at body language alone, that's a really confusing message that they're sending. So I do think body language plays an important part. But I also think injecting yourself into a different culture, you also need to understand or identify that they'll have different movements that mean different things.
Yes. And if in doubt, either ask or back away and observe, and then you find out afterwards if need be, so that you're not just going in with something that is not going to be supporting and helping that win-win that you talk about. And I'm looking at some more, there's some great comments here. So in our culture, Chris is saying some people find humor a mixed bag, but I still use it to diffuse hard conversations. Yes. And that's true. I mean, and humor, we have to be careful about humor in Australia. And it's funny, you mentioned this earlier, Patricia, self-deprecating humor is a great way to go. Yeah. And we all still have to be careful with that one, because if we overuse self-deprecating, and certainly as someone when in my earlier years, I wasn't very certain about a lot of things, and I was doubting myself a lot. And so I could probably self-deprecate, and then people go, oh, I'm not sure she's actually that competent, because if she's putting herself down, even though it was intended as humor, I think there's a limit to that. And I'm not sure, Chris, if that's what you're thinking, but I totally agree that it's a fantastic way to diffuse those conversations. Yeah. And it's looking like that LinkedIn user. Sorry, I don't know your name. It just says LinkedIn user. Perhaps over communicating is a way to ensure that messaging is robust. So yes, that's an interesting one. If you want to add more to that, we're very happy to talk to that. But over communicating, it's either that or it's backing away and then working out, coming back and having another meeting, which may not always be possible, of course, but it's always that adapting. Yeah. And one point I wanted to comment on too, Patricia, which I think is interesting in how we choose to communicate, is that we are what I either call an expander or a contractor. And the contractors don't tend to say very much. And I know that you've told me that you're a contractor, and I've seen you be a contractor in action, which means that you are to the point and then you stop talking, which is interesting when you think about your background, actually. Have you learned to do that and go against your kind of family upbringing? Or what made you do that? Or have you always been like that?
Yeah, I think the reason I'm a contractor is I go straight to solving a problem. So, you know, somebody's asking me a question, I've already solved it before they've even finished.
Yes.
So that's, you know, if somebody says, right, I'm going to give you half an hour to discuss whether it will be raining tomorrow or not.
Yeah.
You know, I'll be like, well, of course it is, because the news told me it is. Whereas somebody else could talk to you about weather patterns and put it in context. And so I need to be aware of that. I need to ensure that I'm giving context to my answers, because people aren't following my thought pattern because it's in my head. So I identify that I'm a contractor and go straight to solution. And so I think that's why in my consulting background, I've worked on doing that and providing context before I get straight to the solution.
Yeah, nice. Again, it's being adaptable and having that ability. And I'm very much an expander. So I will love to talk about ideas. I love ideas and philosophies and think how things, you know, might work. And I'm a big why person. So I love to give a lot of background. And I had to learn that some people just don't care. They really
I
don't.
just want to know what the question is so I can give you the answer.
Yeah, that's right. I know. Oh, and thank you. Final thought from you, Chris, saying yes, not too much humor, just a balance. Absolutely, yes. It's always about balance, as is indeed almost everything that we do when we communicate, isn't it? It's that balancing act, and it's navigating that, and it's being adaptable while still being authentic. And we have to be true to ourselves. It's not about being fake. And I have been working with clients this week who have said to me, look, how do I sell something when I don't believe in it? So I have to sell it because it's the organization's perspective. This is what I'm selling. I have to persuade. I have to convince. I don't believe in it myself. And I'm curious to know if you have any thoughts on that. My thinking.
That's a tricky one. Yeah, that's a really tricky one.
Yeah. I think it's about finding one thing in there that you can agree with, and then just letting everything else just kind of be there.
So let's pretend it's a product, for example. What I would focus on are the benefits of a product, or sort of the value that a product could provide, for example. I wouldn't lie. I wouldn't say I believe in this because of this. So I'd focus on the facts.
Yes. Yes.
Rather than my opinion.
Yes.
Because I won't lie. I won't, you know, it's self-respect as well.
Yes.
However, there are benefits to most things. So I would explain that.
You would find that somewhere in there. Yes, I entirely agree with that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very much respect my reputation.
Yes.
And I won't cross that line because, you know, I'm told to.
Yes, yes. You don't want to sell yourself out in
Absolutely
that.
not.
Yeah, I totally agree. And look, I'm seeing another comment from Charisma, and I'll finish the thought for Chris, who's saying that's the hardest thing for me. I have a technical mindset. Find it hard to lower down so people can understand clearly. Okay. Yeah.
See, I think just on that point though, I think you can practice. So one of the things I love doing is taking complex ideas and simplifying those for my clients. I love doing that. I love seeing that, I call it that aha moment, where they get it. That makes my day. So whoever said that comment. I can't see the comments. I really think that work on storytelling.
Yes.
Because, good communicators do that. And yes, technical explanations are tricky, but how can you find a way to connect with the receiver of that message?
Exactly. And it's that balancing of the logic and the humanity that we mentioned humanity earlier. And because we are all human, that's exactly what you said earlier. And it's about connecting, and it's about the meaning behind the technical aspects and all of these ideas. So this is great.
Yeah.
Yes, storytelling. And I'd love to come to, so there's a comment from Charisma, and it may be too big to put, too long to put on the screen. So I'll read it out. So in situations where you may disagree, here we go, with someone in a more senior position in a larger forum, but it's important for them to understand your perspective without public finger pointing. What can you recommend? What I understand it's situational, yes. Practical example.
So look, in this, if I understand it correctly, I would just say we can agree to disagree. There's different perspectives to the same topic or the same issue, and people will view it in a different way. And if they are more senior, you don't want to say, it's not about finger pointing and saying you're wrong and I'm right, or I'm right and you're wrong. It's that we have different perspectives, that you've explained both perspectives. You've identified and everyone's aware that there are two perspectives. And if you do need to nut that out, take that offline, and agree to discuss that either in a smaller forum, in a follow-up meeting, one-to-one. But I do think it's, respect the difference of opinion.
Yes. And I think so long as you've given your perspective without going into too much of that detail, if it's not appropriate, I would entirely agree with you about that. I did come across one other person's thought on this, which is to suggest that if you volunteer your perspective in a public forum and then the more senior person doesn't agree with you or wants to shut that down, and of course that is their prerogative because of who they are, is that you just then, your final response before disappearing back is to say, well, I know that this organization, assuming it does, you can't lie, that I know this organization respects sort of diversity of views, and so I thought I'd offer my perspective on this. And you can, if your tone is okay, and this comes back to the LinkedIn user earlier talking about tone and body language, how do we see that? If your tone's good, nobody objects to that. But you're
I think it's being respectfully challenging.
Yes.
Like, how boring would this world be if everyone just agreed on the same thing?
Yes.
But doing it in a respectful manner, and I think the way you just framed it is perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it does work, isn't it? Because so long as everything's respectfully done, then, as you say, you can take it offline or do whatever's needed. So, Charisma, I hope that was helpful. Do come back if you want to ask anything else. And I'm also seeing a LinkedIn user saying 3 cheers for persistent practicing of communication and listening skills. So, yes, persistent practicing and listening, oh my gosh, that is one of the things that makes the biggest difference. So, and I know you've put listening in capitals, so thank you for that. And Zen as well saying, coming back to the core of the customer. Yeah, exactly. Yes, always bringing it back to what's happening there. And what do they really need, which I think ties back perfectly to what you were saying at the beginning today, Patricia, about, you find out what they need and then you're making that win-win for them. And the navigation of how that occurs along the way. So look, I mean, we've been half an hour, so I reckon we'll wrap up. Because this is sort of good timing. Is there any final thought you have for anybody watching or watching the replay? Any kind of top level thought?
So for me, effective communication is landing the message that you're wanting to get across to the other person in the way that you're trying to land it. And you can do that by being aware and adapting your style to mirror the other person's style so that everybody's comfortable.
Exactly. So that adaptable authenticity, that is it, nailed. Yeah, perfect. Good. Thank you. And thank you, Charisma. I'm glad that answered your question. That's good. And of course, this is, as you say, a complex question. So I'm sure that either Patricia or I would be very happy to, also speak with you once the session's over. If you want to DM either of us around this, I'm sure we'll be both very open to that as well. So I'm going to say thank you so much, Patricia. Thank you for joining me today. It's been fantastic to have you on. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you the next time the two of us meet, and looking forward for all of you who are watching or watching a replay, looking forward to the next one. And always feel free to reach out with any comments or thoughts, either around this or indeed any topic around communication. So thank you, and bye for now.
Thank you.
Thanks.